My dad got a call at 3 in the morning asking for 15 grand. The guy on the other end was his best friend, or at least, he used to be. They'd worked construction together for years. Welding jobs, mostly. Refineries, bridges, whatever paid. They were close. The kind of close where you don't need to explain yourself. But this call was different. My dad could hear something in his voice. Desperation. Maybe fear. The guy was in Iraq, somewhere outside Baghdad. Said he needed the money fast. Wouldn't say why. Just kept repeating he'd pay it back next month. My dad said no. He hung up, went back to bed. Never heard from him again. That was 20 years ago. I was in elementary school then. Didn't know anything about it until I was older. Until I was struggling with my own career and went to my dad for advice. That's when he told me this story. And honestly, it's one of the most disturbing things I've ever heard. Because my dad could have been the one making that call. He could have been the one who disappeared. See, a year before that phone call, my dad was offered the same job, same site in Iraq, same promises, high pay, promotions, a chance to finally stop breaking his back for someone else's profit. His friend practically begged him to go, but my dad said no to that too. And that decision probably saved his life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. My dad's in his 60s now. Lives outside Houston, spent most of his life doing manual labor, construction, welding, fabrication, hard jobs, the kind that destroy your body over time. I remember being a kid and watching him come home every night completely exhausted, covered in grime, smelling like metal and sweat. He'd complain about his back, his knees, his hands, but he never missed a day, never called in sick. That's just how he was. I hated seeing him like that. Even as a kid, I knew I didn't want that life. So I worked my ass off in school, got into a good college, studied business, landed a decent corporate job. I thought I'd made it, thought I'd escaped, but a few years into my career, I hit a wall. I was doing everything right, meeting deadlines, exceeding targets, but I kept getting passed over for promotions. Meanwhile, guys who spent more time kissing ass than working were climbing the ladder. They'd take the boss out for drinks, play golf, laugh at his jokes, and suddenly their management. It pissed me off, so I drove out to see my dad one weekend. Needed to vent. He listened to the whole thing, didn't interrupt, just nodded. And when I was done, he said he had a story for me. This story, he said back in the early 2000s, he was working with a crew out of Houston, mostly refinery jobs, oil and gas infrastructure, decent pay, but not great. The work was steady though, and he'd been with the same team for years. That's where he met Miller. Miller was a welder too, around the same age as my dad. They hit it off right away, worked the same sites, same shifts. After a while, they started grabbing beers after work, became friends, real friends, the kind of guy you'd trust with your life. They worked for a contractor that operated in teams. You'd get assigned to a crew, and that crew would move from site to site together. My dad's team leader was solid, fair, paid on time, kept things running smooth. But Miller started getting restless. He'd complain about the pay, about how the team leader was making all the money while they did the actual work. And one day, Miller came to my dad with an offer. He'd found another contractor, better pay, better benefits, and if they jumped ship together, there was a chance they could start their own crew down the line, be the ones in charge. My dad didn't know what to do. On one hand, he trusted Miller, and yeah, the money was tempting, but leaving felt wrong, like he'd be betraying the team leader who'd always treated him fairly. He thought about it for a week, finally decided to take the risk. He followed Miller to the new company. That's when things started to change. Miller barely worked anymore. He'd show up to the site, sure, but instead of welding, he'd spend hours talking to the supervisors, the site managers, taking them out for drinks, buying rounds, schmoozing. My dad asked him what he was doing. Miller laughed, said my dad didn't get it, said he was networking, building relationships, making sure the right people knew his name. My dad thought it was bullshit, but he kept his mouth shut and focused on his work. A few months later, Miller got promoted, crew chief, just like that. And suddenly, he was a different person. He stopped returning my dad's calls, stopped grabbing beers. When they did talk, Miller was condescending, acted like he'd earned something my dad hadn't, like he was better. My dad felt betrayed, but what could he do? Miller was his boss now. So he kept his head down, did his job, stayed out of Miller's way. Then one day, Miller called him, said he wanted to grab a drink, talk about old times. My dad didn't want to go, but Miller was still his supervisor. He didn't feel like he had a choice, so they met at a bar. Miller bought the first round, acted friendly, like nothing had changed between them. Then he got to the point. He said he'd been offered a job overseas, Iraq. Big reconstruction project, some new development outside Baghdad. American contractors were hiring welders and site supervisors. The pay was insane, triple what they were making in Houston, maybe more. And Miller was going as a site manager. He said if my dad came with him, he'd make sure he got a management position too. No more grunt work, no more breaking his back, just overseeing crews and collecting a paycheck. My dad didn't answer right away. Miller kept pushing, said it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, said they'd be idiots to pass it up, said in a year, they'd come back with enough money to start their own company. My dad said he'd think about it, but he already knew his answer. Going to Iraq felt wrong. He had a wife, a kid, me, and yeah, the money sounded great, but something about the whole thing made him uneasy. Maybe it was Miller, the way he'd changed, the way he was selling this so hard. My dad didn't trust him anymore. So when the official job posting went out a few weeks later, my dad didn't apply, but almost everyone else on Miller's crew did. Miller kept trying to convince him, followed him around the site, called him at home, said he was making a huge mistake, that he'd regret it, that he was wasting his life. My dad stayed firm, told Miller to leave him alone. Eventually, Miller gave up. The crew left for Iraq a month later, 10 guys total, Miller included. For the first few months, everything seemed fine. Miller would call every now and then, send updates, said the job was great, the money was rolling in, they were living in a compound, getting fed, safe. My dad felt relieved. Maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe it really was a good opportunity. Then the calls got less frequent. Miller stopped sending updates, stopped answering when my dad tried to reach him. My dad figured he was just busy, didn't think much of it, until he ran into one of the crew members back in Houston. It was about a year after they'd left. My dad was working a site near the port and saw the guy, recognized him immediately, walked over and said hey. The guy looked uncomfortable. My dad asked what he was doing back, thought the job in Iraq was supposed to last 2 years. The guy didn't answer at first, just looked down. Finally, he said things didn't work out. My dad pressed him, asked what happened, and that's when he learned the truth. The Iraq job was a nightmare. When they got there, they found out there were all these requirements they didn't know about. Language certifications, work permits, stuff Miller never mentioned. Most of the crew couldn't get cleared to work. They were just sitting around the compound doing nothing. But Miller promised he'd fix it, said he was working on it, talking to the right people. Weeks went by, then months, no progress. The crew started getting desperate. They'd spent their savings to get there, left their jobs back home, and now they were stuck. No income, no way back. Miller kept saying he'd handle it, kept taking the supervisors out, buying them drinks, spending money they didn't have. That's when the crew realized Miller was borrowing from them. At first, it was small amounts, 100 here, 200 there. He'd say it was for permits, for bribes, for greasing the wheels, but he never paid them back. And then he started gambling. The guy didn't know all the details, but he said Miller got in deep with some local guys. Poker games, maybe, or sports betting, doesn't matter. What matters is he owed money, a lot of money. And when you owe money in a place like that, people don't just sue you, they come collect. The guy said he got out before things got really bad, scraped together enough cash for a plane ticket and left. But a few of the crew stayed, either because they couldn't afford to leave or because they still believed Miller would come through. My dad asked what happened to them. The guy looked at him, said he didn't know for sure, but he'd heard they got dragged away because of Miller's debts. My dad didn't sleep that night. He kept thinking about Miller, about the crew, about what dragged away meant. He knew what it meant. Human trafficking, debt bondage, forced labor, maybe worse. It's not uncommon in that part of the world. Foreign workers get trapped, promises turn into threats, and if you owe the wrong people money, you don't just disappear. You get sold, traded, used. My dad started putting the pieces together. That phone call a year earlier, the one at 3 in the morning, Miller asking for 15 grand. My dad thought it was weird at the time. Miller was supposed to be making bank in Iraq. Why would he need to borrow that much money? Now he understood. Miller was already in deep, probably owed way more than 15 grand. And he was calling everyone he knew, trying to scrape together enough to pay off whoever he owed. My dad had been one of his last calls. And when my dad said no, That was it. Miller ran out of options. My dad tried to find out what happened to him. Called the contractor, called the embassy, got nowhere. No one had any information, or if they did, they weren't sharing it. Miller just vanished. The crew members who stayed behind? Same thing. No record, no contact, just gone. My dad talked to a few other guys who'd worked overseas. Iraq, Afghanistan, Qatar, UAE. They all had similar stories. Contractors who promised the world and delivered nothing. Workers who got stranded. Some made it home, some didn't. One guy told him about a welder who got stuck in Dubai for 8 months. Couldn't leave because the contractor held his passport. Had to sleep in a shipping container. Lived on scraps. Another guy said he knew someone who got sent to a site in Saudi Arabia. Showed up and found out the job didn't exist. The contractor just wanted bodies to fill a quota. Left him there with no plane ticket home. These stories are everywhere, but no one talks about them, because the guys who make it back are embarrassed. They don't want to admit they got scammed, that they fell for it. And the guys who don't make it back? They can't talk. My dad thought about how close he came. If he'd listened to Miller, if he'd taken that job, he'd have been stuck just like them. No way to work, no income, borrowing money just to survive. And eventually, he'd have been one of the ones who didn't come home. He kept thinking about Miller, wondering if he was still alive. Maybe he paid off his debts. Maybe he's working some other site under a fake name. Maybe he's sitting in a prison somewhere. Or maybe he's dead. My dad doesn't know. And he'll probably never know. But what he does know is that Miller destroyed himself. All that schmoozing, all that networking, all those shortcuts, they got him promoted fast, but they didn't build anything real. And when things went bad, no one helped him. Not the supervisors he bought drinks for. Not the managers he sucked up to. No one. Because those relationships were transactional. They weren't real. Miller climbed fast, but he fell faster. My dad stayed on the ground. Kept working. Kept his head down. And yeah, it was slow. It was hard. But he's still here. Miller isn't. And that's the point my dad was trying to make when he told me this story. He said I could keep getting mad about the guys at work who kiss ass and get promoted. Or I could focus on doing good work and building real relationships. The kind that last, because shortcuts might get you somewhere fast, but they don't keep you there. And sometimes, they destroy you. That conversation changed how I see my career. I stopped caring about the guys who were climbing faster than me. Stopped comparing myself. Started focusing on my own work, building real skills, earning trust the right way. And it worked. I'm doing fine now. Better than fine, actually. Got promoted twice in the last 3 years. Not because I played politics, because I'm good at what I do. And people know it. My dad's retired now, lives quietly. Doesn't talk about Miller much, but I know he thinks about him. Wonders if he's alive somewhere, or if he's one of those guys you hear about on the news. Found in a shallow grave outside some city no one can pronounce. Another foreign worker who trusted the wrong people. I think about that phone call a lot. 3 in the morning, desperation in Miller's voice. Asking for 15 grand he'd never pay back. That was probably his last chance. His last attempt to save himself. And my dad said no. I don't blame him. He couldn't have known. And even if he'd sent the money, it probably wouldn't have been enough. Miller was in too deep by then. But I wonder if Miller thought about my dad in those final days. If he felt betrayed. Or if he understood. I hope he understood. I hope wherever he is, he realized my dad made the right call. Both times. When he didn't go to Iraq. And when he didn't send the money. Because my dad would have just gotten dragged down with him. This story's from 20 years ago. But it's still happening. You see it in the news all the time. Job scams, workers getting trafficked, promises of high-paying overseas gigs that turn into nightmares. Cambodia, UAE, Qatar, Iraq, doesn't matter where. The pattern's the same. Big promises, big money. And once you're there, you're trapped. So if you're ever offered one of those jobs, think about Miller. Think about how he chased shortcuts his whole life, how he climbed fast and burned every bridge on the way up, and think about where he ended up. Because my dad's still here, still alive. And Miller? No one knows.